Hi, everyone, and welcome to Women Leading Startups Fireside Chat. This is our second Fireside Chat of the semester, and I'm Inaya Abdelgaber, a political science student at Memorial University, one of the universities participating in this semester's Networkshop series. Thank you all for joining us today, and even though we are still 6 days away, I wanted to say Happy International Women's Day. Starting off with some of the upcoming things we have planned for you. We have one remaining Women Leading Startups Fireside Chat after today. As you might already know, each chat features a different female identifying startup founder from Canada. This event is open to all students who want to be part of an of a supportive entrepreneurial community for women. Check out the link in the chat to sign up now. We are also hosting one more networkshop this semester, and it's titled Beyond the Canvas. That networkshop is designed to be an introduction for the next steps and important considerations after you have filled the Lean Canvas. This networkshop will take place on Thursday, March 11th, and you can find the link to sign up in the chat as well. The Networkshop series and Fireside Chats are a partnership between 7 Atlantic Canadian universities that include St. Mary's University, the Memorial University of Newfoundland, Dalhousie University, University of New Brunswick, Cape Breton University, Mount St. Vincent University, and University of Prince Edward Island, including their campus in Egypt. Additionally, there's a virtual conference for women entrepreneurs titled Strike Up, and it will be taking place on March 4th. The conference has a great panel of speakers, and it is an amazing opportunity to learn from Canadian renowned women leaders, and the registration link will be posted in the chat as well. So that is enough about what is coming up this semester. Now it is time to kick off our chat today. And our topic for today is the entrepreneurial F word, which is failure. For today's networkshop, we have partnered with Canadian Ecosystem Gathering, a community that aims to nurture collaboration between Canadian innovation ecosystems. Today, we have two amazing panelists, Rachel Poutler and Claude Arsenault, who are joining our discussion today about failure and how important it is to the journey to success. Rachel founded her first company, SunCare, as an undergraduate student in nanotechnology engineering at the University of Waterloo. Since leaving SunCare, Rachel has spent the last 5 years helping startups get their first paid customers, working in the electric vehicle, chatbot, and education industries. She recently joined the team at CodeGem, a management tool for software developers. Claude holds a BA in public relations and has been working with the high-growth, small and medium-sized enterprises and startups for more than 7 years as a founder, advisor, and executive. She currently leads acceleration projects for Maine, Quebec, a nonprofit organization working to increase the impact of accelerators on Quebec startups by 10 times within 10 years. Now, I would like to welcome to the stage Rachel Poutler and Claude Arsenault. Hi, folks. How are you?
Hi.
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure having you two here with us. Today's layout for the event is just going to be a brief chat between us. We're just going to be talking about failure, as I mentioned. And at the end, we're going to be networking with attendees. And I'll mention the networking part when we come to it. But for now, I want to kick things off with a quick intro. So can you briefly tell us what do you do and what is your experience with failure? Rachel, do you want to?
Okay. Yeah, sure. It'd be helpful just because we're in a live setting. Sure. So thank you for the intro. I think you told most of my story in that, but just high-level overview. So I studied nanotechnology engineering at the University of Waterloo. A lot of my co-ops were focused on research, academic research, and I realized that I hated that. So I wanted to get into something a little bit more applicable by the end of my undergraduate career. Formed a company with a couple of my classmates in my last year of school called SunCare. That honestly went horribly wrong. We basically the entire co-founding team just completely blew up. So we can definitely get more into that later. So that's definitely a part that I feel like is related to failure. Since then, I moved on into working in a sales and marketing role. So I realized that although I did an engineering degree, really technical, I actually like being a customer facing type of person. So I've been doing sales and marketing, product management, company leadership for the past 5 or so years. I've worked for more startups than I should have worked for, some of them for very short periods of time because they didn't work out. It happens. But now I'm working at a company called Cogem, and so far I've been there a couple months and it's been going okay. So we do engineering management, so software developer management tools, really just to help you grow and scale your engineering team.
Awesome.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And Claude, what about you?
Yeah. So as you mentioned in the intro, I studied public relations. And a little bit like Rachel, I initially thought I would go towards research and become a professor, but very quickly I got a part-time job in the corporate sector working for the largest PR firm in Canada, and decided to join them full-time even before I finished my BA, which, by the way, is a really, really bad idea. Having a full course load and a full-time job at a consulting firm is not something I recommend to anyone. Very quickly, I had always had research interests in the sphere of social media and how digital communication would affect human relationships. So very quickly, I was pegged at the firm I was working at as the perfect person. Also, I was the only young person there, as the perfect person to co-found a new practice within the company about digital communication and social media. So I got to kind of build a company within a company. What were we going to sell? How much would it cost? What did it imply? Selling it obviously to external clients, but also to internal stakeholders, selling it to other consultants within the firm and explaining the value. We did give a lot of internal training about back then RSS feeds and Twitter and getting our colleagues on LinkedIn. That wasn't a thing yet. I moved on and kept working in PR for a few years and decided I needed a break from my life. Went and decided to go do a harvest for a winery in Ontario for a few months, which turned out to be a 4-year adventure. I got to run sales and marketing for a really fast-growing winery, adding different sales channels and iterating really fast on our marketing and our brand. We were experiencing about 30% year-over-year growth for those 4 years. So it was a lot of work and a lot of fun and really a huge crash course in those sectors. I was then approached to co-found a startup in food and artificial intelligence for commercial kitchens. That was a really, really great adventure that took us to a top accelerator named Techstars AI in Montreal. I was there for about 1.5 years. Through that entire 1.5 years, I had a lot of very difficult things happen on the personal front, including 3 deaths and 4 cancers in my family, amongst other things. And so that compounded into a huge mental health crisis for me, which led to me leaving the startup I had co-founded about 1.5 years later, and questioning really what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I started doing a little bit of consulting and found this really great organization that I'm still involved with today in Maine. Our job is really to federate everyone who helps startups in the province of Quebec, and I get to design and run initiatives to fill the gaps in that ecosystem. So that's pretty much it.
That sounds like a very eventful and long journey for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So I'm just going to start with a quick question, but I also want to remind the attendees that they can post any questions they have for Rachel or Claude in the chat, and then I'll ask them here. But the second question I have, what do you think of failures? Do you think they come with advantages, or are they mostly disadvantages?
I think that failure not only comes with advantages, but I think that you kind of have to go through failures. If you're not going through failure, it's because you're not doing anything. There's this great saying that always came to mind when I was running my startup, which was, if you want your sailboat to look nice and pristine, you leave it in the harbor, but that's not what a sailboat was built for, right? And it's bound to weather some storms, and it's bound to suffer some damage when it's out there, but that's really what it was built for. So the only way to not suffer any failure is to stay in the harbor. But really, at the end of the day, you won't really have fulfilled your purpose if you do so.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything you just said. I think for me, failure, every single time you think that you failed, that's a learning opportunity. So anytime that something doesn't go the way that you think it should, what did you learn from that? If you don't learn anything from it, I would say that's a failure. But if you've done something wrong and the next time you do it in a different way and you get better results, fantastic, you're learning. I think doing a startup, you're going to you have to learn so quickly. That is the number one skill I look for in entrepreneurs that I want to work with is, are you able to learn fast enough to keep up? And that comes through failure. There's a fun statistic where it's even your company in general. So I've worked for a bunch of different startup companies. There's a statistic that says a founder who has failed at a previous startup company is 20% more likely to succeed the next time. So every time you're doing a new startup company, you are more and more likely to succeed because you've learned what doesn't work. So I think for me, it's all about the learning. If you're not learning from it, then you need to go back and figure out what you're doing wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. And as a person, if I fail and then I go ahead to do something else, in the back of my mind, I had that experience, which will make me look out for what's coming, and basically just watch out and learn from it and apply that to my new position or my new adventure. So I have another question for you. And what did you learn from your past failures, and how did they help you with your new successes?
That's a big one. And I think there's difference, and failure is such a big term and encompasses so many things, right? Because every day we have tiny failures. We fail to wake up on time, or we spill some coffee, but there's the big failures. And I think Rachel and I, that's both what we were alluding to when it came to our startups. And I mean, for me, in my case, it was two things, right? Like my startup failed, but I failed too as a co-founder and as a person at identifying my needs. So there's kind of a lot to unpack here. I would say that the things that kind of link back to both of those things, to what happened to my startup and what happened to me, are, first of all, being a perfectionist is not good. You need to learn that good enough is good enough, and to kind of let go. The more you try to perfect something, first of all, you're not iterating on it, you're not learning from it, you're not putting yourself through that loop, and you also become really attached to it. So that would be one thing. The second is about setting boundaries and limits. So for the startup and for me, same thing, right? You have to be able to kind of ahead of time, before you're in the trenches, say, this is a line I'm not willing to cross. Either the second we run out of money, or the second we reach this amount of runway, we need to make some decisions. Or me personally, the second that I feel myself becoming irritable with my family, then that's a line I'm not willing to cross, and I need to revisit what's going on that front. That said, though, that experience as a whole has enabled everything that's come after for me, right? It was an opportunity, and Rachel, you put it beautifully, to learn and to grow, and it's become really the foundation of everything I am and everything I do now. It has really shaped me, and it has enabled the rest of, well, I won't say the rest of my life, that's a bit ambitious, but it has enabled the next phase in my life and the next chapter. And so I try and really practice gratefulness towards past me, and towards even the mistakes that I made, for everything that they brought to me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, I'll try to pick up some things that you didn't talk about there, because a lot of that, I resonate with so much with what you said there. I think for me, one of the big things that I guess I've learned from some of my past failures. So the first company I founded actually just got acquired. So it wasn't a complete failure from a company perspective, but I mentioned before we had a co-founder blow up. I'm not involved in that company. I haven't been for a few years. So for me, that was a huge personal failure because I couldn't stick through with something that I started. I was fresh out of school. I didn't know what I was doing. Part of what we did wrong there, or part of what I did wrong, is that we weren't conscious about the team that we were building. We were very much so, we were all classmates. We were all the exact same skill set. We were all, no diversity whatsoever. So I think for me, one of the biggest things I've learned in terms of building a team is to be very conscious of your own personal skill set and how your co-founders complement that. So now when I'm looking to join a team, I want to know exactly what is the gap that you see in your own skill set and how can I help you fill that? Or like when I'm looking to bring people onto my team, I'm looking for, what am I not good at? Because I'm not good at a lot of things. And what do we need to bring the startup forward? So I think for me, it's been a lot of personal reflection on like what I want to do, what I'm good at, what I could get better at, but don't really care about. There are a lot of things like that that's so critical in building your early stage team. That's one of my biggest learnings. I think from a broader company perspective, because I've been involved in a couple other startups that just failed epically by themselves rather than just the team blowing up. There are two critical things in an early stage company that are the biggest risks. Number one, I found, is technical risk. So if you're building software or you're building like a service or something like that, typically your technical risk is minimized. I've worked for, some life science hardware companies where honestly, like the things we were trying to build were kind of impossible, or at least well beyond our ability. So understanding your technical risk and if your company and your team can mitigate it. The second is market risk, and this is way more common. Do the people you're trying to sell to actually want what you're trying to sell to them? You think it's a great idea? That's fantastic. You might talk to your friends. They say, yeah, I'd use that. But talk to the people who you actually think are your target market, because they're the only ones who can tell you whether or not you have a good idea. So for myself, definitely personal growth in terms of what I'm good at. From a company, early stage, mitigate your technical risk, mitigate your market risk.
Yeah, Rachel, I really agree with that. And on the market risk, and it's funny, it's one of the very few notes I have for today. It's that I see a lot, and I get to see a lot of startups now, but I see a lot of startups that come up with really great solutions, but they might not be solving for a problem, or they might not be solving for a problem that is impacting enough to the people they want to sell it to that they're willing to put money on it, right? And that's the mistake that we made. We had this great solution and we thought it was awesome. And it was, but at the end of the day, if we had started the other way around and started by talking to people and identifying their problems and building something that answered their needs, we would have come up with a different solutions. And I see so many great startup ideas, but they're solutions. And if you can't link that back to a problem, if you're not really trying to immerse yourself in that problem day in, day out, you're going to have a lot of trouble with that market fit. And you're going to have a lot of trouble coming up with a solution that is 100% tailored to the people that you're trying to solve a problem for. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that startups are facing, especially early stage.
I 100% agree.
Completely agree with that. That was just on point. And you touched on a lot of great points. And actually, my next question was related to perfectionism. So I think of myself as a perfectionist, and I always want to get things right on the first try, which makes it hard for me to deal with failure. So I'm wondering, do you think of yourself as a perfectionist? And if you do, how do you think that impacted your entrepreneurial experience in general, whether with failures or successes?
Cool. I'll start this one.
I am such a perfectionist, and it was actually always something that I prided myself on when I was in school and in my early corporate career. I thought it was what made me great at my job. And it took entrepreneurship, and it took the startup world and the idea of iterating fast to make me realize that it wasn't my greatest strength, it was my greatest weakness. And I don't say that lightly. First of all, it is so anxiety inducing. It compounds the anxiety and the stress that everything around you create. But it also makes you hold on to things more, things that you should learn to let go of, that you maybe don't need to prioritize. And as I mentioned earlier, it kind of like it makes you keep things until they're perfect, but you just need to get them good enough so that they can get out there, and that we can get back to what we just mentioned in the previous question. Does it actually solve a problem for someone? It doesn't need to be perfect. You'll know right away. If it's good enough and it solves a problem, then you work on making it better and better and better. But that is a feedback loop that is so much more important than coming up with something that's perfect. If you're waiting until something is perfect, you will never bring anything to market, right? Because there will always be technological advances, and there will always be new competitors that you need to measure against, and there will always be new ideas, and you're just going to keep working on this thing in your own little bubble forever.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think for myself, I don't think I would call myself a perfectionist. Maybe I would have when I was in school. I don't definitely wouldn't now. So maybe that's been something that startups has taught me. I think for myself, like, yes, back in school, I definitely like always wanted to get like the best grade possible, finish projects as well as possible. So maybe there was a bit of perfectionism in there. I didn't really think about it that way. But I think for myself with a startup, yes, I want to do great work. Yes. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm going to put out terrible work out into the world, because it reflects on me as a founder. It reflects on me as, even if I'm not a founder, just the company, right? So I think there's a really like thin line between like going too far into perfectionism and just being able to represent yourself properly, or yourself for the company properly. Um, the one thing I would recommend for anyone who is struggling with perfectionism, or just thinking about it and thinking that they won't be able to get things out there, is that you really need to learn how to focus. If you're able to focus your perfectionism, get the thing that's most critical out, get it done. Even if you spend a little bit extra time on it, as long as it's the right thing to be working on at that point in time, it's okay. You can let your perfectionism go into that a little bit. Make sure it's something that you're proud of, but don't like try not to like be all over the place and trying to like pick up different things and trying to make them all perfect simultaneously, because you're going to go crazy. So I would say, if you're struggling with perfectionism and trying to get things out like that you're really proud of, learn to focus on the most important thing, get it done, move on. Don't multitask. It's a lie. Everyone tells you can multitask. You can't. In a startup, you need to pick the one thing you need to focus on right now and then move on.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on prioritizing here, which is key, right? And also wondering why you're being a perfectionist about this thing. Let's say you're working on a landing page for a website. Like, if it is perfectly usable and it conveys the right message, but maybe that frame is not exactly where you would want it, it's time to let it go. What is it going to achieve if you spend an extra hour or an extra 5 hours on this project? Is it actually going to meaningfully impact the results you get from it or not? And I think that's where you can kind of get a pretty quick rule about what it's worth spending that extra hour on and what it's not.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people I know in my circle, and I myself struggle with like prioritizing, and just like, I think I can do a lot of things at the same time, but I also want to get them out to be like the best version they could be. But I like thinking about it, I need to like prioritize first, or else I just won't get anything done, or I won't get it done as good as I want it to be. And then I'll just feel bad about it. Okay, so the next question that I have here is, when do you know it's the right time to stop? And how do you avoid continuing your startup because you invested too much time or too much funding in it?
That's a really big question.
We can start with, when do you know that it's the right time to stop, and then we'll move to the second part. I think it's gonna take a good chunk of our chat today.
Okay, so I would say knowing when to stop and actually stopping are two completely different things. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who are working on something that they intuitively know is not going to get them anywhere, but there's this like, it's yours, right? It's your baby. Like, you don't want to give up on something. You want to do whatever you can to just move it forward, even though in the back of your mind you're like, I don't know if this is going anywhere. So I think for me, especially with an early stage company, again, back to those two big risks, technical and market risk. Those are the two big things that should be indicating whether or not it's time to stop. If you're working on something that's technically complex and you can't do it, that's probably a time to like shut the company down. If you're working on something that nobody wants to buy, that's pretty good indication that it might be time to stop. The other thing that I would say, and kind of relevant to both Claude and I's experience, is you personally, is your mental health suffering because of the startup? For me, that's why I ended up leaving the company I founded, because I just could not work with the people I was working with. I felt terrible every day. I was not in a good mental state. So for me, it honestly just took a huge blow up. I definitely could have done that a little bit better. But for me, it was just assessing like, what is my stress level? What am I comfortable with? Like, I was having panic attacks. I'm like, okay, that's not normal for me. I'm not typically an anxious person. So for me, I knew I was well past my breaking point. And so that was a message to me that it wasn't time to shut the company down, because it was still going pretty well, but it was time for me to step away from it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is key to what Rachel just mentioned, both on the professional side, but also on the personal side, is setting some goalposts, right? And you want to be running your company with OKRs or with KPIs and with clear goals in mind, but don't move the goalposts when you don't reach them. When you start not reaching your goals, start wondering why, and either set more realistic goalposts or recognize that you won't reach them, but kind of keep trying, like constantly trying to reach the same goalposts and just pushing them forward or resetting them every time you don't reach them, it becomes really discouraging. And that was a huge issue for me. We kept iterating on who we were going to sell to and what we were going to sell exactly with the same tech. And every time, like I was in charge of sales, right? So I would have to come up with a new sales strategy, and then we would keep trying, and then we weren't really moving forward. And I just felt like I was stuck in this kind of like Groundhog Day scenario where every day I went to work and I was trying things and I could not see the end of it, because we didn't have goalposts that were realistic, and also because we kept not reaching them and not asking ourselves what's going wrong here. So that was a huge part of it for me. And on the personal side, I think start cultivating your self-awareness, like start asking yourself, just like Rachel did, hey, I'm having panic attacks. I didn't used to have panic attacks. What's going on here? It's really hard to do that when you're in it. And I know I had my first burnout and I was 21. And even that was not enough for me to start asking myself those questions. I went right back into it and did the same thing. And it took me a really long time to actually start to recognize the signs in me when I wasn't doing well. And those signs aren't always as obvious as being sad all the time and having panic attacks. For me, it's that I become irritable and I withdraw and I stop walking outside. So what I've done is I've actually built this kind of like, I call it my life tracking spreadsheet. And every day I input a few KPIs, really based on the startup way. I track how much I walk, how much I sleep, how well I eat, how much water I drink. And they're all KPIs that mean something to me, right? Like it doesn't matter to track things if they don't have an objective behind. But for me, those are all things that like, when I stop taking care of myself, it's a sign that something is not going well. And those are leading indicators that something might be going wrong with me. So I track that information every day. It's super easy. It takes me less than 5 minutes. And then I can look at which way it's going after a couple of weeks. And also just having to take the time to ask myself, hey, did I eat okay today? Hey, how did I sleep? It forces me to actually articulate how I'm feeling and to be really aware of it and to understand where my limits are and when I might reaching them, and to first be able to ask for help, but also just, warn my colleagues, I'm really sorry. Like I just did this before this conversation, actually. I was super irritable with a colleague and I went back to her and I was like, I'm really sorry for the way I just behaved with you. I haven't been sleeping well. This winter and this COVID thing is getting to me. This was unacceptable. And like, I got that I did that and I won't do it again. But you need to develop this sense of self-awareness to be able to come to that and to not let those mistakes repeat themselves, right? That's a huge part of learning from your mistakes, is putting in place some coping mechanisms and some structures so that you don't repeat them after.
I completely agree with that. That is very true. And sometimes, like we could think that our mental well-being affects our work, but also we need to realize that our work affects our mental well-being and our personal life as well. And it's important that when you're not doing well, to just take a step back, realize whether it is your work or not. And if it is, then maybe that's your time to stop or do something about it. Okay, so building on that, how do you avoid continuing your startup just because you invested too much time or funding in it?
Okay, this is a really hard question to answer. Because it's, I'm curious about Claude's experience, but I guess like from my own experience, I would definitely speak to the fact that like getting to a point where I feel disengaged from the company, like I don't feel like I'm as passionate about the company anymore. I'm like irritable with the people that I'm working with. I no longer believe that I no longer trust them. Like that's a pretty clear indicator that something's going wrong with the company. So I think for me, like yeah, definitely don't wait until you get to the point that you're having panic attacks if you don't normally have them. So I think to Claude's point, build out your own self-awareness of like when you're eating, sleeping, all that kind of fun stuff. But I think it's a really hard realization to come to. But if you make the decision, I would say the way to kind of know if it's right is to tell someone close to you that you're like shutting the company down, and see if you like. For me, I felt a huge wave of relief just telling someone that. I felt like that level of relief told me like this is the right decision for me right now. So if you're thinking about it, if things are not going well, if you're not hitting your KPIs or you keep pushing them, like tell someone you trust, I'm shutting the company down. And if they go, whoa, what the hell? You can say, okay, maybe not. Maybe let's rethink this. But if you feel relief saying that, it's time to shut the company down.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, Rachel, absolutely. And I do think having, as you mentioned, like looking at your performance on your KPIs and stuff. Looking back, like our startup, we kept it going longer than it should have. First of all, we'd run out of money and we were not paying ourselves, and we just really were trying. But I look back now and I'm like, but why were we trying for? If you lose sight of why you're doing it, and it becomes a lot harder to continue because you're kind of in this rat race, and it becomes really hard to kind of step back and look. So I don't know. I would definitely try and engineer ways to periodically look back and reassess, like, do we want to be doing this? Like if I was to build another company, I would definitely try and build a way to kind of, obviously you can't have that view all the time because you need to be like basically stuck to your companies by super close, but engineer a way that takes me out of the day-to-day life and makes me look at the big picture on a regular basis, whether it's, I don't know, monthly or 5 or 6 times a year, just like co-founder level. Hey, are we still in this? Like, remember we were doing this for that. That was our mission. Like, are we still doing that? Is that a thing still? Like, how do we feel about it? Obviously, this is an ideal scenario where your co-founder relationships are not the problem, Rachel. I get that, but I think that would be definitely something I would put in place moving forward. And for me personally, well, I want to think that I learned from my experience. I definitely stayed longer at that startup than I should have. Like basically, 6 months in, I found out that a very close family member was suffering from an aggressive form of cancer, and I moved in with them to help them go through chemo and recover from surgery. And I was doing that while working full-time on a startup remotely. And I felt like I was failing at everything. I was failing at being there for my family member. And I felt so bad being stuck in that room all day working and not really there for them and not able to, like the whole point, and those might have been the last months I was going to spend with them, and I was spending them stuck in a room working on a thing that I didn't know was going to work. And likewise for my co-founders, right? I was not the person that I had committed to being with them because some of my brain space was occupied with chemo appointments and making sure my aunt was fed and making sure that she was feeling okay and she was taking her medication. So I was kind of like, I felt like I was failing to everyone. And when I finally was able to express that to my co-founders, and I expressed that to my aunt, we found a solution that worked better. But you have to kind of come to that realization and you have to express it, and you kind of have to ask for help and articulate it to the people around you. And we figured out a way where I was working less hours and I was focusing more on the things that were bigger priorities and letting go of some stuff, which was very hard for the perfectionist in me. But we worked on that. And looking back, I almost regret that compromise. I think maybe what I was trying to do when that happened was get out now because I wasn't feeling okay in that co-founder relationship, and that compromise kind of made me stay longer than it should have. And I should have, I didn't have the self-awareness to make that decision. And I stayed for an extra 8 months in the company until finally, as you said, Rachel, like I spoke to my co-founder and I felt so much relief at even like entertaining the thought that maybe this could not be my day-to-day life and I could do something else. And I didn't have to feel that pressure and that dread coming to work every day. But it took another 8 months for that to happen. And I think a huge part of it was also the loyalty I felt to the team for sticking with me through all of those hard times. So, I mean, I feel like I rambled a little bit, but there are a lot of points in there. And I think, yeah, like I come back to self-awareness and to expressing what you need and to setting boundaries and making sure that you respect them.
I want to jump in on one other point there. It's the external perception. Like your friends, your family, if you've launched, your customers, like, are you going to feel like you're letting them down if you shut down your company or if you leave your company? Probably a lot of people do, and that's why they stay in their companies a lot longer. They don't want to let people down, right? And so my comment to that is, yes, definitely, if you have customers, you need to support them. If they, you sign a contract saying they're going to have your service for a certain period of time, you have to give that to them. But if you're pre-customer, no one's going to like judge you for shutting down your company. Honestly, like that was one of the hardest things I had to learn, is that people actually looked at me and they're like, good for you. Like that's a really hard thing to do. That shows that you're actually like thinking through yourself, your company, you have this self-awareness, this business awareness to say that something's not working properly. Now that you're not investing so much time into this company, you can focus your efforts on something new, something better, right? The one piece of advice I would give to everyone is that even if you shut your company down or you leave the company that you co-founded, it's not like life ends. Like there's, like your career, if anything, is going to be even better for it, because people love when they see resumes with like entrepreneurial experience on it, because it shows people that you're going to jump in and get the job done no matter what the job is. So I think, yes, your friends, your family, by the time you've launched a company, they're probably like so sick of you talking about your company all the time. So they just associate your identity as being the co-founder of that company, but they'll adjust. They'll understand if you need to shut it down or if you need to step away from it.
And Rachel, actually, like this is one of the first things that I thought of when you first told your story about leaving your co-founders because you weren't, it wasn't working for you. To me, that's an example of success. It's not an example of failure. You identified that you were uncomfortable in a situation, that it wasn't working for you, and you didn't stick with it for the wrong reasons, right? You took yourself out of that situation. And that is something that I strive for, that I'm really bad at. And I don't see that as an example of failure. I see that as a huge example of success.
Right. And so we've been framing failure as like your company shuts down, you leave your company. Like, again, like we've been talking about like this failure as like a learning opportunity, as like, if you're going to make a boat, you should actually sail it. Right. So for all of these conversations, it's like having the ability to do that is not a failure. Did I feel like I failed? Yes, I did stay at my company a lot longer than I should have, similar to you, Claude. But it was also just the fact that you're able to do that and move on and do something new with your life. That's not a failure. That is you recognizing the best path for you.
And standing up for yourself is never a failure.
Yeah,
definitely not. I completely agree with all your points, and I'm so glad you're sharing them. And looking at it, it's not a failure that you left the company. I see it as maybe it was a mistake or a failure that you didn't identify these needs earlier on when you thought that like, okay, this is getting too much. So we have another question here. One of the attendees is asking, where can aspiring entrepreneurs find investors to talk to about ideas? So where do you think they should look and all of that?
This is one thing that I'm really bullish on. Depending on where you are right now in your company, like how far along you are, you probably don't need investors yet, and you probably will not get investment yet. Investors these days, like especially if you're looking at like pre-seed or something like that, you're going to need to have proven that you've mitigated some technical risk and proven that you've mitigated some market risk. And so depending on where you're at, I don't know your personal situation, but I would look for things like pitch competitions, grants, look for things designed for early stage idea funding. You do not need investors yet. There's also a path where you can grow your company completely without investment. And I think the one thing that the startup world celebrates a little bit too much is investment. Yes, you need money to grow, but you're going to be not a lot more, but you can be successful growing through revenue rather than investment. So I would just encourage you to look for sources of like non-dilutive or like money that you don't give up shares in your company before you look for investment.
Those are great points. What I would add is, first of all, if you're only at the idea stage, I would discourage you from talking to investors and having them shape your idea and what you're going to build. Don't build a company so that it's investable. Talk to clients, talk to advisors, talk to people in the space who understand what the problem that you're solving might be and who can help you make it better. And when you have that, and when you can show that to investors, that's when they'll be interested in investing, if that's the path that you choose to have at your company. So that would be number one. And number two is I would look at incubators and accelerators. Obviously, I'm preaching for what I work with, but those are networks of advisors. They can help you take your idea from nothing to a full-fledged companies. They already have all the resources. They usually have the sector expertise, and they also have the investor relationships. And the one thing that works best with investors, they will tell you, and I saw data just this week again, is warm intros, right? If you come to an investor with no common relationship, they get hundreds of pitches every week. So for you to look different to them, to look more interesting, more appealing, well, first you need more than an idea. You need to have a reason why you're the right person to be working on that idea. And you need someone who's ready to vouch for you. So I would say work on putting that network together first. And that can be advisors, it can be coaches, it can be colleagues, it can be other startups. And obviously the pitch competitions and everything that Rachel talked about for early stage company is part of that ecosystem as well.
Amazing. So we're coming to the end of our chat today, and to wrap up the chat. So I was wondering, what are some good practices to handle failure, and what advice would you like to give to other aspiring entrepreneurs?
The biggest thing I would say in terms of handling failure, okay, so we talked a little bit about perfectionism. The other thing I think we didn't really touch on is imposter syndrome, or like feeling like you're just not good enough in general for the job that you're doing. So the way that I kind of approach both of those, build out a fantastic support network. You're going to need people around you who can pick you up when you fall down. Also, I mean, like, there is a way to be a solo founder. It's a whole lot easier if you have co-founders, because they can help you balance some of that emotional load. So build out your support network of friends, family, other co-founders in other companies. So use the incubators and accelerators to do that, build that network. And then just have them, like, they're probably aware of what you're working on because you talk about it nonstop. So just get them to like share with them where things are at, get them to pick you up if you are feeling down. Everyone has bad days, everyone has great days. Start building a company is a roller coaster of emotions. So have a great support network around you who can really just help you manage those emotions within yourself.
That's great. And I would add, be open. And that there's two aspects of that. First of all, it really helps with the community aspect that Rachel was talking about. And the reality is startups don't ever grow on their own, right? They grow because they're nourished by a network of people, they're nourished by resources, they're nourished by funding. It takes a village to raise a startup, really. And you can't do that if you don't tell anyone about your idea because you're worried they might steal it. The reality is it doesn't really matter what your idea is. Someone else has had it. It matters what your take is on it, and it matters how you execute on it. That's the first part of being open. The second is, don't let your ego get in the way of admitting that you failed, of asking for help, of raising your hand when you need something, of asking questions. Everyone is just figuring it out. It goes back to what Rachel was saying about imposter syndrome, but like, don't let that make you more isolated. Speak up, ask, and tell people what you need.
Amazing. So before I wrap up, we got one other question, and we can briefly touch on it before start closing here. But one of the attendees is asking, do you see a place for student talent like PhD, master's, undergrad to get engaged in the startup process? I think I know the answer already, but I'll let you go ahead with that.
Yes, definitely. It doesn't matter how much experience you have. It does not matter like where you're coming from. Just try it. You never know. You're going to learn so fast that it doesn't matter how much experience you have prior to. So it's totally cool if you're a student. You can start a company whenever. I know, like, elementary school students who have started companies. So like, go for it.
Yes, I could not have a more resounding yes on my end either. Startups need talent. They need good talent. They need qualified talent. And we actually, what you don't see as students is that there are lots of startup people and lots of people who help startups who are together in rooms right now figuring out how to get talent. And you guys are like the most important resource for startups to be able to grow. Is we need talent, and we need qualified talent like you. And obviously, people who have done a bit of research, who are master's or PhD students, you have subject matter expertise. We are working on ways, and I can speak to Quebec, but I know that it's the same throughout the country. We are working on ways to support you better on developing the business acumen and developing the business curriculum so that you have the whole skill set to become entrepreneurs. And I think that the only way that the Canadian startup ecosystem is going to succeed and is going to grow and is going to become, people are going to think of Canada and they're going to think of startups, is if we can get our student community more engaged earlier and to invest in startups and to see the value of being involved in startups, whether as an advisor, whether as a founder, whether as an employee, whether as a customer, like absolutely.
I'm going to throw a shameless plug in here because I am currently hiring. I'm looking for great talent. So you're actively looking for software developers. Okay, sorry, that's it.
Okay, amazing. Well, would you like to just reiterate what the company's name is in case someone joined us after we gave the intro, so they can go ahead and apply or look at the positions for sure.
Oh, sure. Okay, so company name is Codegem, so CODEGEM, and it's codegem.app.
Amazing. So on that note, we will be ending our chat today. Thank you, Rachel and Claude, so much. It was great chatting with you today. And I really found that today's chat about failure and learning from just past experiences and is very insightful and inspirational. So we had a networking session before the workshop part of our event, but don't worry, we have another one planned so you can connect with people. So before you head to networking, I'll just give a quick crash course on what it is and how to get there. After I'm done, click on the networking tab on the left side of the screen. Share your camera and audio, and you will get matched randomly with someone else in the room for 3 minutes. And after that is over, it matches you with someone else. So it's a very low effort and fun way to meet with people that you wouldn't normally get a chance to chat with. So don't log off just yet and come say hi in networking. We'll be there. Have a great day, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed today's event.